Part 1: A childhood marked by tragedy. Long before the Louis Vuitton name became a symbol of luxury, it belonged to a boy who knew far more about hardship than wealth. Louis Vuitton was born on August 4, 1821, in the small village of Anchay, in eastern France. It was a quiet countryside surrounded by forests and farmland, where life was simple, but rarely easy. His father worked as a farmer and miller, and his family lived modestly, with little money and few opportunities. When Louis was just 10 years old, tragedy struck. His mother passed away, leaving a hole in his life that could never truly be filled. Not long afterward, his father remarried. Instead of finding comfort, Louis found himself living with a stepmother who, according to many historical accounts, treated him harshly. Home became a place of strict discipline rather than love, and every day made him dream of something more. But in the early 1800s, dreams alone couldn't change your future. Most children born into poor families were expected to spend their entire lives doing the same work as their parents. There were no shortcuts, no social media, and no overnight success stories. If you wanted a different life, you had to risk everything. At just 13 years old, Louis made an almost unimaginable decision. He left home with little more than the clothes on his back and set out for Paris, the city where opportunity seemed possible. He had no fortune waiting for him, no relatives to rely on, and no guarantee that he would even survive the journey. All he had was determination. That single decision, to walk away from everything he had ever known, would become the first step in building one of the greatest luxury empires the world has ever seen. Part 2: The 300-mile journey. Leaving home was only the beginning. To reach Paris, Louis Vuitton had to travel more than 300 miles on foot, a journey that would take him nearly 2 years to complete. Today, that trip could be finished in just a few hours by car. But in the 1830s, it was an entirely different challenge. There were no highways, no trains connecting every town, and certainly no money for transportation. Louis walked through forests, crossed rivers, and passed countless villages, taking whatever work he could find along the way. Some days he worked on farms. Other days he helped craftsmen or laborers in exchange for food, a place to sleep, or just enough money to continue traveling. Every mile tested his determination. Many people would have turned back. The journey was exhausting, lonely, and filled with uncertainty. But Louis refused to give up because he believed that Paris offered something his small village never could: a chance to build a different life. Finally, in 1837, after years on the road, the 16-year-old arrived in the French capital. Paris was unlike anything he had ever seen. The city was growing rapidly, attracting artists, inventors, merchants, and entrepreneurs from across France. It was crowded, noisy, and full of opportunity, but it was also incredibly competitive. Thousands came to the city chasing success, and most left with nothing. Louis knew that if he wanted to survive, he needed more than determination. He needed a skill that would make him impossible to replace. That opportunity came sooner than he could have imagined. Part 3: Becoming an apprentice. Shortly after arriving in Paris, Louis found the opportunity that would change his life forever. At just 16 years old, he became an apprentice to Monsieur Maréchal, one of the city's most respected craftsmen. But he wasn't making handbags or clothing. He was learning the art of crafting travel trunks and packing boxes. At the time, traveling was becoming increasingly popular among France's wealthy elite. Steamships and railways were making long-distance journeys faster than ever before, and rich families needed durable, elegant luggage to protect their valuable belongings. It was a job that demanded precision. Every trunk had to be measured by hand, built from high-quality wood, and covered with waterproof materials. A single mistake could ruin weeks of work. Through years of training, Louis developed an incredible eye for detail and a reputation for craftsmanship that few could match. His timing couldn't have been better. As Paris expanded under Emperor Napoleon III, the city's upper class grew rapidly. Wealthy customers weren't just looking for luggage, they wanted products that reflected their status. Soon, Louis's skill caught the attention of some of the most influential people in France. Among them was Empress Eugénie, the wife of Napoleon III, who hired Louis as her personal trunk maker and packer. It was an extraordinary honor, placing him among the highest levels of French society and introducing his work to aristocrats, royalty, and some of the richest families in Europe. For the young man who had once walked hundreds of miles with almost nothing, it was a remarkable transformation. But Louis wasn't satisfied with simply making trunks for other people. He believed he could build something even better. And that belief would lead him to take the biggest risk of his life. Part 4: The Birth of Louis Vuitton. By the early 1850s, Louis Vuitton had spent nearly 2 decades perfecting his craft. He had earned the trust of royalty, built a reputation as one of Paris's finest trunk makers, and learned exactly what wealthy travelers wanted. But while everyone admired his work, Louis noticed a problem that no one else seemed interested in solving. Travel trunks at the time all looked the same. Most had rounded lids, a design meant to help rainwater run off when they were carried on horse-drawn carriages. But as trains and steamships became the future of travel, those rounded trunks created a new problem. They couldn't be stacked. For travelers carrying multiple pieces of luggage, this was frustrating. For transport companies, it wasted valuable space. Louis saw an opportunity where everyone else saw tradition. In 1854, he opened his own workshop in Paris under the name Louis Vuitton. Instead of copying the designs everyone already knew, he introduced something completely different: a flat-topped trunk. It was simple, it was elegant, and it completely changed the travel industry. The flat design made trunks easier to stack, easier to transport, and far more practical for the new age of railroads and steamships. At the same time, they remained lightweight, durable, and beautifully crafted by hand. Customers immediately noticed the difference. Word spread quickly among Paris's elite, and orders began pouring in. What had started as a small workshop was becoming one of the most respected luxury businesses in France. Louis had proven something that still defines the world's greatest companies today. True innovation isn't always about inventing something entirely new. Sometimes, it's about improving something everyone else believes is already perfect. Part 5: Becoming the symbol of luxury. Louis Vuitton's flat-top trunks quickly became the gold standard for luxury travel. What began as a clever innovation soon turned into a status symbol. Wealthy families, successful businessmen, and members of European royalty all wanted the same thing: a trunk crafted by Louis Vuitton. As demand grew, so did the company. The workshop expanded, employing more skilled craftsmen to keep up with the increasing number of orders. But even as production grew, one thing never changed. Every trunk had to meet the same extraordinary standards of quality that Louis had established from the very beginning. Soon, the Louis Vuitton name became associated with something much greater than luggage. It represented elegance, precision, and exclusivity. During the second half of the 19th century, Europe was changing rapidly. Railroads connected major cities, steamships crossed oceans faster than ever before, and international travel became a symbol of wealth and prestige. Wherever the world's elite traveled, Louis Vuitton trunks traveled with them. But success came with an unexpected problem. As the brand's popularity exploded, competitors began copying Louis Vuitton's designs. Cheap imitations flooded the market, hoping customers wouldn't notice the difference. For many companies, this would have been a disaster. For Louis Vuitton, it became the inspiration for one of the smartest branding decisions in history. Instead of competing on price, the company would make its products even more distinctive, even more recognizable, and even harder to imitate. That decision would create one of the most iconic symbols the fashion world has ever seen. And change the future of luxury forever. Part 6: The Battle Against Imitation. As Louis Vuitton's reputation grew, so did the number of people trying to copy it. By the late 1800s, Louis Vuitton trunks had become so desirable that counterfeit versions started appearing across Europe. Other manufacturers attempted to recreate the designs, hoping to profit from the reputation Louis had spent decades building. But Louis understood something important: a luxury brand was not just about the product. It was about identity. If customers couldn't tell the difference between a real Louis Vuitton trunk and a cheap imitation, the entire value of the brand was at risk. So the company began creating designs that were impossible to confuse with competitors. One of the first major breakthroughs came with the introduction of the Trianon canvas, a gray material that became strongly associated with Louis Vuitton. Later, the company introduced the damier pattern, a distinctive checkerboard design created specifically to fight counterfeiting. But the biggest transformation came years later, when Louis Vuitton's son, Georges Vuitton, continued his father's vision. In 1896, 4 years after Louis Vuitton's death, Georges created what would become one of the most recognizable patterns in the world: the Louis Vuitton monogram canvas. The famous symbols, flowers, stars, and the LV initials, were not just decoration. They were a statement. They told the world that Louis Vuitton products were authentic, carefully crafted, and unlike anything else on the market. This was a revolutionary idea. Before this moment, luxury brands rarely focused on creating instantly recognizable logos. But Louis Vuitton understood something that modern companies still use today. A powerful brand can become more valuable than the product itself. The monogram transformed a simple travel trunk into a symbol of prestige. People weren't just buying luggage anymore, they were buying history, craftsmanship, and a connection to a name that represented excellence. And this idea would help Louis Vuitton survive for more than a century. But the company was about to face its biggest challenge yet. Because building a legendary brand was only the beginning. Keeping it alive for future generations would be the real test. Part 7 From Family Workshop to Global Empire. After Louis Vuitton passed away in 1892, many companies would have struggled to continue without their founder. But Louis had prepared something greater than a business. He had created a philosophy, a commitment to craftsmanship, innovation, and attention to detail that would be carried forward by the next generation of the Vuitton family. His son, Georges Vuitton, took over leadership and dedicated himself to expanding his father's vision. He understood that the future of luxury would not only depend on creating exceptional products. It would depend on creating a brand that the entire world could recognize. Under Georges' leadership, Louis Vuitton began expanding beyond France. The company opened stores in major cities, attracting wealthy customers from across Europe and eventually around the world. The famous LV monogram became a symbol of sophistication, appearing on trunks, luggage, and travel accessories used by some of the most influential people of the time. But the world was changing. Travel was no longer only for royalty and the extremely wealthy. As transportation improved, more people began exploring the world, and Louis Vuitton adapted by creating products designed for a new generation of travelers. The company introduced smaller bags, handbags, and accessories that combined practicality with luxury. This was a turning point. Louis Vuitton was no longer just a luggage company. It was becoming a lifestyle brand, a name that represented adventure, elegance, and success. But as the decades passed, the company faced a difficult question. How could a family business that started by making trunks in a small Paris workshop become a global empire that dominated the luxury industry? The answer would come from a bold transformation that changed Louis Vuitton forever. A transformation that would take the brand far beyond travel and turn it into one of the most powerful names in fashion history. Part 8 The LVMH Era, Turning Luxury into an Empire. By the late 20th century, Louis Vuitton had already built a legendary reputation. The brand was known around the world for its craftsmanship, its iconic monogram, and its connection to luxury travel. But the company was about to enter a new era, one that would transform it from a famous French brand into a global luxury powerhouse. That transformation began in 1987, when Louis Vuitton merged with another French luxury company, Moet Hennessy, creating a new group called LVMH. At first, the idea was simple: combine several prestigious brands under one powerful company. But the person who would truly change the future of Louis Vuitton was businessman Bernard Arnault. Arnault saw something that many others didn't. Luxury was not just about selling expensive products. It was about controlling desire. He believed the world's greatest luxury brands needed to remain exclusive, protect their history, and create products that people dreamed of owning. Under his leadership, Louis Vuitton expanded beyond traditional luggage and became a complete luxury empire. The company entered new categories, including handbags, clothing, shoes, jewelry, fragrances, and accessories. It also began working with some of the most creative designers and artists in the world, bringing together tradition and modern culture. One of the smartest strategies was collaboration. By partnering with famous artists and designers, Louis Vuitton attracted younger generations while keeping its heritage alive. The brand became something that existed between fashion, art, and pop culture. But perhaps the most important part of Louis Vuitton's success was what it refused to do. Unlike many companies that chase higher sales by lowering prices, Louis Vuitton protects its exclusivity. It rarely discounts its products, carefully controls distribution, and creates the feeling that owning a Louis Vuitton item is an achievement. Because in luxury, the product is only part of the value. The story behind it is what makes people want it. And thanks to this strategy, Louis Vuitton became much more than a fashion company. It became a symbol of success recognized in every corner of the world. But the biggest question remains. How did a young boy who walked to Paris with nothing create a brand that would eventually become one of the most valuable luxury names in history? Final part. The billion-dollar legacy of Louis Vuitton. More than 200 years after his birth, the name Louis Vuitton represents something far greater than fashion. It represents ambition. It represents craftsmanship. And most importantly, it represents the power of believing in an idea when nobody else sees it. Louis Vuitton started life as a young boy in a small French village with almost no advantages. He lost his mother, left home as a teenager, and walked hundreds of miles searching for a better future. He didn't inherit a fortune. He didn't have connections. He built everything through patience, discipline, and an obsession with creating something better. His first breakthrough wasn't a luxury handbag. It was a simple travel trunk. But Louis understood that the smallest improvements could create the biggest changes. He saw a problem with traditional luggage and created a solution that transformed the way people traveled. Over time, that simple idea became one of the most powerful brands in history. Today, Louis Vuitton is recognized around the world. Its iconic monogram appears everywhere, from fashion runways and Hollywood events to the collections of some of the wealthiest people on earth. But the true value of Louis Vuitton isn't only found in its products. It's found in the story behind them. A story of a teenager who refused to accept the life he was given. A story of a craftsman who turned creativity into an empire. And a story that proves that extraordinary success often begins with a single decision to chase something greater. Because before there was a billion-dollar luxury brand, before there were famous stores around the world, before millions of people dreamed of owning the LV monogram, there was just a young boy walking toward Paris, carrying nothing but hope and determination. And that boy changed the world of luxury forever.